I'm a 36-year-old female in Sweden. I have worked in mental health care for the last 18 years, mainly with people with psychotic illnesses like schizophrenia. I was working at a group home for 9 years, and we were all very close with my co-workers there, especially 2 females. The last few years I worked there, another female began working there too. Her name was Mandy, and the 4 of us grew very close. She was very timid, shy, friendly, and we got along well. She was, however, off on a long-term sick leave because of her own mental health issues, so we didn't meet much at work, but she always showed up at our after-work dinners, so we continued to stay in touch even though she wasn't well enough to work full-time. She told us that she had a history of schizophrenia herself, just like the patients we were treating, but that she was medicated and hadn't had any psychotic episodes for years. Since I have an education in psychiatry and long-term experience with schizophrenia, I have no judgment towards people suffering from the illness, and it didn't bother me being friends with someone who had a diagnosis like that, and even after what I tell you, I still feel the same way. In the summer of 2023, I had moved on to work at a new place, also within mental health, but this time forensic psychiatry, like a halfway house for mentally ill murderers, etc. The 4 of us stayed in touch and still met every once in a while for dinner parties. Mandy told us she had been evicted from her apartment because of an incident where she had accidentally entered her neighbor's apartment in the middle of the night. She told us that in the huge apartment complex, the doors looked exactly the same, and that she simply walked into the wrong door by accident, and that the neighbors had created a scene out of pure drama and reported her to the police. I somehow felt that while that sounded out of proportion to evict someone just for that, perhaps the landlord took that kind of action because he judged her based on her medical history, and I felt bad for her. I questioned her if something else had happened and she claimed that it didn't, and that was the full story. For context, in Sweden it's very difficult to get a contract for an apartment when you've been evicted. You pretty much get blacklisted. Mandy even asked me if she could move in with me, since she was literally on the streets, homeless, and of course, I said she could. I've always gotten myself into sticky situations by saying yes, instead of thinking about myself, and I had no idea how severe this situation would get when I said yes to her. I live in a pretty small apartment. It's 1 bedroom that kind of much only fits a bed and a desk, a living room that fits a couch and a TV, with no room for an extra bed, with a small kitchen and small bathroom. I have 2 cats. We decided that Mandy was going to live in the living room, and I told her that I wouldn't mind throwing away my couch so that she could have a bed there, but she said she was fine with sleeping on the couch since it was comfortable enough, and I insisted on getting her a bed, but she declined. There's a door between the living room and bedroom, but between the living room and hallway, there's just an open arch, so she wouldn't have total privacy. I hung up a thick velvet curtain covering the arch, so at least it gave her the sense of a door, and more privacy than nothing. There's another door from my bedroom to my kitchen, so I have 2 doors to my bedroom. I have to have one of them open at night since my cats want to go in and out, and they also have their litter boxes in the bathroom, and water and food in the kitchen. I naturally kept the kitchen door open and not the living room door, since that's where Mandy lived, and we wanted to keep our privacy somehow. She wasn't working at this time because she was on one of her long-term sick leaves. While I was working night shift, sometimes I had to get up at 6 a.m, and sometimes wouldn't arrive home till 11. I have really severe insomnia and have a very specific prescription, and even with this I still wake up easily. I told her that I would appreciate it if she could try and stay quiet those nights when I have to get up at 6 a.m. But it's fine if she's loud when I'm off work, or when I have to do evening shifts. She was a heavy smoker and coffee drinker, so I bought her a coffee machine to make her enjoy her living situation a bit more. The coffee machine and the sink are placed right outside my bedroom door, and as I mentioned before, the kitchen is very small. So the first night together, I had to get up at 6 for my shift. As usual, I had a hard time falling asleep. Mandy had been up several times that night to go out and smoke, and I woke up every time. At 5 a.m. she started making coffee, and since it's literally outside my bedroom door, I was wide awake from the sound of it. I asked her in the nicest possible way why she was up this early, asking if she had any plans for today. I mean, she's on sick leave. Why not sleep at 5 a.m. if you can? And she said that she just couldn't sleep. I told her I was sorry for her, but would appreciate if she could just wait with making the coffee till 6 a.m., since I really needed that last hour of sleep for work. Added to why I needed my sleep is that I have epilepsy that gets really bad when I don't sleep enough. I usually get a lot of seizures when I don't get at least 4 hours sleep, and I knew that I would probably get seizures at work now, meaning that this day would be both stressful and potentially dangerous for me, since there's a huge risk that I fall and hurt myself. And it's not a good thing to get cramps and seizures among the mentally unstable criminal clients who you are supposed to care for. I know it's not an ideal situation to work in that field with my condition, but I can inform you that I did quit after only 6 months. She said she really wanted coffee with her cigarette, but that she would try and wait next time I have to be up for work. I accepted it and went on with my day, but things didn't get better. She continued to wake me up early in the morning and throughout the nights, and continued to promise to stop, but insisted that she really wanted coffee with her cigarettes. I suggested making the coffee the night before, or drinking iced coffee or Coke instead, but she didn't want that. I may add that she demanded for me to be silent at 10 p.m, because that's when she wanted to sleep, and I respected that. She used to get these moments of binge eating where she would empty my fridge and pantry from everything I had. I remember this one time I had bought a big loaf of bread, and she texted me 30 minutes after I left the apartment saying, "Hey, I'm sorry, I ate your loaf of bread. I'll buy it back once I get money." Like an entire loaf of bread in half an hour. I told her when she moved in to feel at home and that what was mine was hers, so I couldn't really get mad, but it started to annoy me for 2 reasons. It was getting kind of expensive since it was such huge amounts, and it was always at inconvenient times of the day, like after an evening shift when the store was closed. I came home hungry, and she had emptied the kitchen of everything that I had bought that same day. Mandy had long, black hair that was everywhere, all over the sink, the floor, the bathtub, and I'm no clean freak, but I think anyone could understand that it wasn't the nicest thing to step on or see everywhere in your house. She also cut her finger and toenails and just left the droppings everywhere, as well as pea drops on the toilet seat every time she'd been there. I saw a silverfish on my bathroom floor. I'd never even seen one, and they eat hair and skin and nails. So I kind of figured this fella probably enjoyed life because of the new filth conditions that my house was in. At first I didn't want to say it straight out because I thought I would hurt her feelings and I didn't want to make her uncomfortable. So I just moved the broom and dustpan into the bathroom to sort of imply that we needed to sweep the floor more often. This didn't seem to work. So after a while I told her in the nicest way possible with a smile on my face, "Do you think we could try and clean the floor in the bathroom more often? We tend to lose some hair when we brush it, and I'm afraid we might get pests. I saw a silverfish the other day and I don't want it to get worse." I always made sure we instead of you so she didn't feel attacked. She promised to think about it, but nothing changed. Shortly after I started dating a guy and was proper head over heels for him. He was also in a roommate situation, so we had a tough time getting any alone time. I asked Mandy if there was any chance we could get one night to ourselves every now and again, and that she of course could get the apartment to herself as well. She didn't like the idea, and claimed that she had nowhere else to go, no friends, no family. Now I wasn't asking her to leave for 24 hours, just a few hours so we can get some quality time together. She could just go off to the library or take a walk or whatever. I was at work for 8 to 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, so she got a lot of alone time herself. One of our old co-workers realized that this was really tearing at my mood, to never get any time for myself. I started to feel suffocated. She offered that Mandy could stay the night at her place. After all, they were friends as well. Mandy said she didn't want to bother her, but we told her that she didn't, that they're friends and that she's more than welcome, and I really just wanted one night to myself with my guy. I didn't understand why she made such a big deal over leaving me in the apartment for just one night. She eventually accepted and spent the night there, and I spent the night away the next week so she could get more alone time too. When I came home the next morning from my night away, I saw my cat's water bowls were completely dried out. There were no spills on the floor, and it looked like it had been wiped out with a towel. I'd filled it to the brim the night before, and asked her how it was possible, and she said the cats must have tipped it out. But there was nothing on the floor. My cats are overly social, and usually cuddled up with strangers after just a few minutes. I noticed that the cats withdrew from her more and more over time, and the last few weeks they never left my bedroom except from when they ate or used the litter box. It seemed like they were scared of her, which I couldn't figure out since she was so timid. I had this old saucepan from the 60s that meant a lot to me. You probably wonder how a saucepan can mean a lot to someone, but it was my grandmother's and it was the only thing I have that belonged to her. My mother also used it to cook for me when I was small, so it has great nostalgic value to me. She burnt it one day, and made no attempt to clean it, just left it on the stove and went out for a smoke. I found it ruined, and cried. She didn't even say she was sorry. She broke dishes several times, didn't bother to replace them or apologize, and naturally, this added to my frustration with her. At this point, probably 2 months had passed, and she kept on waking me up at night, kept binge-eating my food, never cleaned, never left the house, scared my cats, and ruined my objects. I realized she stole my prescribed sleeping pills, lots of them, and I only get one per night, no more, no less. And as you already know, I really need them. I had 20 of them in my nightstand when I left for work, and when I came home they were gone. She denied it was her, which was pretty hilarious since no one else could have been there. My frustration was getting heavy. The summer heat was strong, and I felt locked up in my tiny bedroom with my 2 cats, never getting any time to myself, never any alone time with the guy I was dating except for once every 14th day. My apartment was messy, and she was stealing from me. Out of nowhere, my old elementary school classmate texted me on Facebook how I knew Mandy. He had seen that I had posted on Facebook how we were roommates now. I told him that we were old co-workers and that she needed a place to stay because she was evicted. He said, "I know. Do you know why she was evicted?" "Yeah, she accidentally went into her neighbor's apartment." He told me that that wasn't the whole story. Apparently she broke in, snuck up to their sleeping baby with a knife in her hand, but luckily the father woke up and wrestled her down and managed to save the baby's life. That's when I felt sick to my stomach. Could it be true? It would certainly explain why she was evicted, but it sounded so horrible. She was such a nice, timid girl, I had so many questions, but my friend had the full police report. Apparently the couple that Mandy had broken into was his ex-girlfriend and her family. It seemed that Mandy had a psychosis during the break-in, but those parts weren't public. It was however clear to me that she'd been lying about what happened, and about how long she had been mentally stable. I was starting to get quite paranoid now, and was already frustrated with everything, and really wanted her to move out. We did, however, have a contract that she had 30 days' notice. I knew that if I asked her in a harsh way, it would mean 30 days of chaos until she moved out. So I wanted to handle this as nicely as I could. I started looking for cheap hostels for her so that I could suggest to her that she wouldn't be on the streets. I sat down with her and told her that I loved living with her and that I felt horrible for this, but that I just missed my alone time, and that the apartment is honestly too small for 2 people, and that it wasn't personal, and that I wouldn't want to live with anyone else right now, and that I wish it could have worked out, but that I'm really sorry, and I hope we could remain friends. She looked crushed, and said that it wasn't possible. I showed her the hostel I found, and said that I understood that it wasn't the ultimate solution, but I really needed her to leave, because I felt suffocated, and the summer heat was making it tough, to always have the door to the bedroom closed, and that it was tough for me to not get the sleep I needed. She said okay, she was going to try and move out, but not until 30 days had passed, and I said of course. The first night after our talks, she got up and made her coffee at 2:30 a.m., and I nearly had a mental breakdown. I was going to get up at 6 a.m. and couldn't go back to sleep. I asked her in the morning for probably the 10th time to not make coffee until I get up, but she didn't even answer me. She just sat at the sofa and stared out the window. "Mandy?" I said. She kept staring. I was freaked out but left for work. She kept being weird, kept making a mess, kept waking me up, kept eating my food. All I could think about was the incident with her and the baby and the knife. I eventually got so pissed off about being woken up by the coffee maker that I unplugged it and stored it in my attic, to which she had no access to. It may have been childish, but I was getting so tired at that time. So my sleeping pills were stolen. I was starting to feel like Edward Norton at the beginning of Fight Club. Well, the next morning I wake up at 4 a.m. to her making coffee in a saucepan. I tried talking with her again, explaining this situation, but she just stared at me and didn't reply. Me being so frustrated and on the tipping point, I took the saucepan and stored it in the attic as well. I know, but I was going crazy, and just wanted her to stop with the nightly coffee routines to get the hint. The third night, I had the guy I was dating sleep at my place. I was getting really paranoid now over her weird behavior and not speaking with me, and just staring into space. I woke up from my very light snooze by him poking at me, and he whispered, "Look." In the doorway, Mandy was standing silently staring at us. This was like a scene from a horror movie with her long black hair over her face. I kid you not, I didn't say anything at first. I wanted to know if she just stood there for a long second doing something by the door. But after I realized she was just standing staring at us, it reminded me of the ending of Paranormal Activity, when Katie just stares at Mika in the final scene. So I sat up and asked her what she was doing. Before I could finish, she just slammed the door shut, and I heard the sound of something metal falling on the floor and her running into the living room. I yelled out, "You need to leave," and started crying hysterically because it was turning into a nightmare. Of course I didn't go back to sleep, and I was really happy that I had company that night, and I just kept asking myself, has she done this before? Stared at me in my sleep? So the next day when I got out of bed, I opened the door that she had slammed shut and saw a kitchen knife on the floor. So that was the metal sound I heard before she ran off. I took all my knives and locked them in the attic too. I then asked a friend of mine to come to my house and be here when I tell her that she has to move out immediately, and that I could not wait the 27 days. During the conversation I tried to stay calm. I knew she had a mental illness, and I knew she meant no harm. Even though I was frustrated, I couldn't hate her. I was mostly scared and tired. She, however, didn't even answer when I talked to her. She just kept staring out the window. She left the apartment and sent me a text instead, saying that I was being disrespectful for bringing a friend over to her place. Nighttime came, and I thought that it would be a quiet night finally. No coffee makers, no saucepans. But at 3 a.m., I woke up to her burning dry coffee powder in a frying pan. At that moment I just felt terrified of her. Her face was dead, her eyes were black. I suspected she had gone into a psychosis. I stopped the fire, and she ran off into the living room in silence. I knew she had an appointment with her psychiatrist the next day, and while she was away I packed all her things. I then sent her a text telling her that she needed to pick them up and give me back my keys, and that I would give her money for a hostel for the upcoming 26 days. She didn't reply. The guy I was seeing came to keep me company in case she would fight about it, but she didn't. She left the keys without looking at us and left. Our co-workers who were friends with us both told me that she moved in with a guy that she was dating, and she stayed there for a few weeks until somehow she amazingly got an apartment of her own. She started working again, and I was really happy to hear this. She seemed to be doing well. Then in January of this year, one of our old co-workers told me that Mandy had called her and told her that everything must burn, that she has a baby that she must save, and other delusional stuff. She had called the Swedish equivalent of 911, 112, about this, but they hadn't taken it seriously. Mandy then proceeded to burn down her entire apartment because the voices in her head were telling her that she has to burn everything to save her friends and family. Her neighbors had tried to rescue her from the fire, but she had fought them off and ran back and poured liquor on the fire to make it burn more. She was arrested and sentenced last week for aggravated arson. She will probably serve her time in a mental institution or prison for a while, maybe forever. What's ironic is that she will probably be in the facility where I used to work, and end up where she used to work herself. My old co-worker was a witness in the trial, and apparently she had stopped taking her medication because she thought it made her feel numb, and thought she was stable enough to function without it. Apparently not. She had also stopped taking her medication for the last few weeks she stayed at my house, so when she stared blankly into space, she was going into psychosis. When she stared at me with the knife in her hand, when she burnt the frying pan that last night. It disturbed me to think about what would have happened to me and my cats if she would have stayed, or if I would have been a heavy sleeper. I also think about what would have happened to that baby that she snuck into before she was evicted. And yeah, I know it's crazy that I didn't just throw her out by then, but it was complicated. The reason why I haven't been able to talk about it with my friends is because they sympathize with her and have minimized my experience, and think I make it a bigger deal out than it actually is. I sort of understand it since they've never seen the darkness in her eyes, or that of the last few days. I also just wanted to add a few other things. There were several times I was going to work early in the morning that she occupied the bathroom by taking long baths. I patiently waited till the last minute before knocking and asking if she could get out so that I could get ready for work. I felt really ill one time while she was staying there. I don't know what time it was, but I woke up early in the morning one day feeling very nauseous. On my way to the bathroom, I literally crapped myself and threw up at the same time. It takes 10 seconds to get to the bathroom, so you can imagine how bad it was when I didn't even make it. I had a really high fever, and kept throwing up and crapping myself all morning. And anyone who's been through this will understand that you want the bathroom to yourself. I think it's pretty understandable that you'd want to be completely alone when you're this ill. My head was spinning, and I was nearly hallucinating from the high fever. One random thing I laugh about today is that it was Eurovision week, and for some reason the flute solo from the Moldova song was stuck on repeat on my head while I was in and out of fever dreams. Anyway, working in healthcare, I also have a natural instinct of not wanting to spread infection, so my first thought was that besides wanting to be alone, I didn't want to risk giving whatever I had to Mandy. So I begged her, the moment I noticed, to leave me alone for her own sake. I could barely speak because it made me throw up. Our mutual friend had asked her to water her plants that week, and gave her the keys to her place so that she could have been alone there. But Mandy refused to leave, and I swear if I had the energy to slip out the window and fall to my death I would have, but I couldn't. I was half sitting, half laying on the toilet with a bucket in my lap, my head sort of resting on the bucket of puke, because I couldn't hold it up because of the high fever, and I just begged through whispers for her to leave, so that she wouldn't be ill too. I told her, what if you get sick too? We can't share the toilet, I'll be here all day. You should go to her place before it's too late. Eventually she left, furious at me. It turns out I had a severe case of food poisoning, and I was well again 2 days later, but my God, the fact that she refused to leave is something I felt I had to add, because it made me so frustrated. I also went through our conversations and saw me asking her how long the door had been closed. That reminded me that she used to shut my cats inside the bathroom while I was away from work, so they couldn't eat or drink or use the litter box. She claimed just recently she closed it because she was trying to sleep, but I think she did it out of spite. Maybe she just didn't like cats. Anyway, I just want to say thank you for listening. This has been a real odyssey and very challenging for me, and I'm grateful that it's just all over. Recently there was an Amber Alert, and my daughter was asking me what the beeping sound was all about. For those of you who don't know, Amber Alert goes out when a child is reported missing. If you receive notifications, you know what I'm talking about. The alert will sometimes give information like the victim's appearance as well as the perpetrator, the location of the abduction, and make and model of a vehicle. My phone started beeping one evening while helping my daughter clean her room. An Amber Alert. She asked about it. I gave her a small rundown, and that was that. However, it triggered a childhood memory of the time that I was nearly taken. This isn't a memory that was lying dormant in my subconscious, and this random Amber Alert talk with my kid caused it to resurface in my mind. No. This incident is something I've pondered and thought on and off about for years, and I'm 41 years old now. It's just been a while since I've considered the factors and details of this experience. It happened when I was a young kid, probably around 7. So my parents took me to a neighboring city to do some shopping. We lived in a small rural town, not much to offer, so from time to time we'd go to the neighboring city, which was about a 45-minute drive from where we lived. They would take me there for school clothes, shopping, out to eat because restaurants were better, and because my mum was a crafter. She loved to make crafts, it was her thing. There were different craft stores and fabric stores she liked to go to up there, but this specific trip, we went to a fabric store, Joanne Fabrics. It was a pretty big one. As a little kid, I guess most every place seems big, but no kidding, it was a sizable store. My dad sat in the car while I went in with my mum. He did that a lot, sit in the car when there was a store. He just didn't want to go in, and I don't blame him. I can't recall what my mum was looking for or trying to get that day, but I do remember we were in a section with a bunch of racks of various hanging fabrics. I remember this area being slightly towards the beginning or entrance of the store. As my mum was looking through them, I began to wander, not far though, just enough to kind of look around myself. I was probably bored and started looking around, but I could always see my mum a few racks away, so I knew I wasn't far. That's when a random man approached me. I quickly looked over to where my mum was, and she had moved a few racks up, but I could still see her, but there was a fair bit of distance. So here I am standing behind some racks of fabric with this older guy opposite me. "Hey little boy, how you doing there?" I remained silent because this took me completely off guard. "Where are your folks at? Are you alone?" I stood still and quiet. "Come here, I've got something to show you." At this point he began advancing towards me, coming around the rack to where I was. I quickly started the other way, but he stopped and started coming around the other, as if to meet me in the middle. At this moment I was scared, and the man instantly became aware, and seemed dangerous, like he was trying to get a hold of me. "Come here," he barked. I jerked fast to the left, but he did the same. He had this wild look in his eyes. Whichever direction I went in, he followed. But remember, there's a rack between us, and God, I'm so thankful for that rack. After some back and forth movement from me and this man, I finally lock in on my mum and yell, "Mum, help!" You would have thought I'd have screamed bloody murder, it was so loud, but it got my mum's attention. "What's wrong?" she asked. This startled the man, and he looked over his shoulder in the direction of my gaze, and confirmed that, yep, this must be his mother. His demeanor completely changed, as if everything is fun and games and he was just messing around. And he said as much to my mum. "I was just messing around with him, no harm, ma'am." My mum came to where I was and we reconnected. The guy just tipped his hat to my mum and makes his way out the store. I explained this to my mum, and that the guy was trying to get me. I was visibly upset and shaken. She told me I did the right thing by yelling and getting her attention. I was terrified, for sure, and I'm thankful something crazy didn't happen. Could I have been imagining things like this guy was really just messing around? I don't think so. I could see it. I could feel it. Why would a random older guy be trying to peruse a fabric store and talk up a kid, if he was there for something like crafts? I truly believe he was up to no good. When I was 7 years old, I lived with my parents in a very small village. It was only one road. On one side there were some houses, and on the other side there was a beach. Where the house and the road ended, there was a hiking trail, but I wasn't allowed to go on it. Our house was maybe 4 or 5 houses from the end of the road. This particular day, I was walking our small dog, a Dachshund. I went to the beginning of the trail and was getting ready to turn around and go back when suddenly a man approached me. He was maybe 35 years old, wearing red sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. His glasses seemed to be too big for his face, and his hair was long and greasy. He said hi and started chatting with me. I remember getting a weird feeling, but being so young I kind of dismissed it. But thinking back, I clearly remember his piercing eyes. He was staring really intensely at me, and the whole time he had one hand in his pocket, moving it slowly up and down. It seemed odd to me, but back then I had no idea what he was doing. He asked me all sorts of questions, and that was when my dog decided to take a dump. I remember thinking, oh no, not now. Why do you have to do that now? The man got a weird smile on his face and he said, "Is it crapping?" He then kept staring at my dog doing its business as if he were fascinated. At that point, I knew there was something very wrong with the man. He then asked me to go with him to see his room. I don't remember what I said, but I just knew that it would be a really bad idea. He tried to convince me by saying how nice his room was, and I could see his big TV. As soon as my dog was finished, I made up some excuse and hurried home. When I got home, I told my parents about the creepy encounter, and I remember my dad calling the people whose house the guy said he lived in. They explained to my dad that the man was mentally ill. I think maybe he was their son. My dad said that it was no excuse, and that they had to look after him so that he could never invite small children to his room again. That was the first and only time I met this man, and for that, I'm grateful, as once was more than enough. This story happened about 2 years ago now. I got divorced and moved in with my mom on our family farm. The house is huge and the place is surrounded by our produce fields. When I first moved in with my 2 younger boys, aged 2 and 4, they loved it. It has so many rooms and so much more space than our crappy little apartment in Orlando. As time went by, they would say things like, "Upstairs has monsters," and eventually didn't like being alone in the house. I noticed little things, but eventually got used to the house. Now that I look back, I think they must have seen things that I didn't. After 2 years, I found a good man. We started off slow with casual little dates, which he included my boys in, which was also great. He always wanted to spend time together, even if it was just sitting around the house. One night we decided to sit outside. My mom and the boys were all asleep. I didn't want to wake them up and look for me in the house alone, so decided I would leave my phone on speaker connected to his phone via mute via phone call and take it with us. We were right outside the house, but the boys were on the other end sleeping. Hours had passed as we just talked, and eventually we had seriously started considering going to sleep. All of a sudden we both froze to silence and listened. We hear a man talking in my bedroom. He isn't saying something we can make out, but there's definitely a man speaking to my son. The voice sent shivers down my spine. My son is literally responding to him. We burst into the house and down the hall to find them still soundly asleep, and the room silent and empty. I don't know why, but it still bothers me after all these years. Who the hell was speaking with my son? 2 days before Christmas, at 4:30 a.m., I was awoken by someone banging on my front door. I have a doorbell and a knocker, but this was a first, and it was loud. Bit of background. I'm home alone with my young son. My elder son was back home for Christmas from university, but he had been hanging out with his friends at their house and hadn't come home yet. So my first thought as a paranoid mother is that it must be the police and something bad had happened to him. It may sound totally irrational, I know, but we don't live in the safest of neighborhoods in London. So I race to the door just in my underwear and ask who it is as I look through the spy hole. The man on the other side of the door appears to be speaking to someone behind him, and he then turns back to the door and says, "Don't worry, don't panic." So I immediately start to worry and panic, as now I'm sure it's the police. He's dressed in regular clothes, but so do plainclothes officers. And this guy looks like a copper. He's definitely out of place around here. I start asking if something had happened to my son, to which he replies, "Don't worry, just open the door." I tell him to hang on as I need to find my dressing gown. As I step away from the door, taking a few breaths to calm myself down, I heard him say something. I have no recollection of what it was. I just remember that it was odd and out of place. So I get my dressing gown and come to my senses slightly. I remember that it's 4:30 a.m. in the morning and a total stranger is banging on my door. Everything else that I think has happened is based on my assumption, and whatever he just said to me is triggering an alarm bell. I return to the door and I ask him for his ID. He takes something out of his wallet and puts it up against the spy hole. I can't see it. I contemplate opening the door with the chain to take it. Then he says calmly in an Australian accent, "I just want to hang out, can I come in?" In that moment of realization, I was more enraged than frightened. I screamed every expletive I could think of and told him to jog on. But the next day it occurred to me that had I been wearing pajamas that night, I would have opened the door to a complete stranger who was planning to do God knows what to me. I was sitting in the food court at a mall with a friend who was also 13 at the time, when a random man complimented my hat. He walks away for a bit, returns, and slams $2 on the table we're sitting at. "You guys look bored." We were bored, so we took the money and went to the arcade with him. He impressed us with his mastery of Dance Dance Revolution. We exchanged ages and Facebooks, and while him being almost a decade older than me is an obvious red flag now, I was a naive little emo kid. An adult with a studded vest and cigarettes was the coolest thing ever to me. We sit at the food court again, and he starts talking about his achievements as an MMA fighter. He tells us about his near-perfect record and flexes for us. We play it off like we're impressed by his beer gut. I mentioned Black Veil Brides, my favorite band at the time, and he immediately goes on about how he knows Andy Biersack, the lead singer, personally, and that they hang out whenever he's in town. I bring up Blood on the Dance Floor next, and he tells me he was the roommate of Davy Vanity, the singer and pedophile, years ago, even though he constantly mispronounces his name and had hooked up with Javon Monroe. I could tell he was talking out his arse, but stupid me gave him the benefit of the doubt, and we hung out again a few weeks later with some more of my friends. This is when things got really weird. He started getting touchy-feely with the girls in our group, unwanted hugs, groping, saying generally creepy things, and hitting on them with whips whenever we were in the back of Spencer's. All of this despite having a fiancé who we sometimes hang out with. I was creeped out at this point, but luckily the guys were safe. Until we met the self-proclaimed gay vampire. About 3 to 4 months in, we were informed that he actually has multiple personalities, 2 indistinguishable straight guys, and a gay vampire, complete with hissing, a terrible accent, and no boundaries. Picture a fatter Nosferatu with a neckbeard. He wasn't as prolific with groping the guys, but no one escaped the whips. He kept up with the DID charade for about a month and a half, after which I assumed the vampire personality staked himself out of embarrassment because he was never seen again. Our visits to the mall slowly started to decline over the next year and a half, and then we saw nothing of him, thanks to him getting banned for 6 months for arguing with a mall cop. The last time I saw him, he gave my friend a bag of spice with random herbs sprayed with whatever psychoactive chemical was legal at the time for the uninitiated. For some reason, he refused to buy alcohol because we were underage, but a bag of suspicious internet chemicals was completely fine. We smoked it in the woods later that day, and a different friend of ours goes to use the bathroom at a CVS. 15 minutes later, she is found by a staff member standing next to the door, arm extended towards the handle, pounced around her ankles, completely unresponsive. Considering the unpredictable nature of the spice, she was lucky to leave in a stretcher and not a body bag. I haven't seen him since that day, and my friends would cut contact with him shortly after. From what I heard, his mum still drives him to the mall, and he hangs around the arcades to this day. I'm currently traveling Southeast Asia with my two brothers. We just arrived in Saigon this morning. In the evening after dinner and a few beers, me and my two brothers, older and younger, as I'm the middle, decided to sit on a bench in Howdam Park and have a quick smoke. We're chatting away, sat on the bench, when I noticed a Vietnamese man repeatedly looking at us and walking in circles very near where we were sitting. At first I wasn't too concerned about him, however, my spidey senses were alerted. Then a minute or two later, I noticed another Vietnamese man, dressed as a Grab delivery driver, acting suspicious and repeatedly looking at me and my brothers. The stalkers were both on their phone, and I believe they were communicating with each other. Being in a foreign country, my youngest brother told us to leave. However, it was a good 600-meter walk to the park exit. I noticed both Vietnamese men had got on mopeds and were following us through the park, stopping behind trees and watching us. Then they overtook us and sat at a bench further down the path, waiting for our paths to cross theirs. Being aware of this, we left the path and started walking on the grass as the crow flew to the nearest exit, and thus avoiding the men. We were 100 meters from the exit when my younger brother looked behind us to see one of the men sprinting towards us. My younger brother took a fighting stance, standing his ground, and asked the man what he wanted. The man's posture became very small and he began talking very quietly. Both me and my brother kept a good distance and told him to leave us alone as we walked back towards the exit, noticing the second assailant also approaching us wearing motorcycle gear. However, my oldest brother decided instead of trying to get out of the situation, he got closer to the whispering Vietnamese man to hear what he was saying. Both me and my younger brother were yelling at him to get the hell out of there, but he was being a dumbass. He was being groomed. It took the Vietnamese guy 5 seconds to win my brother's trust. Then, out of nowhere, when my older brother was leaning very close trying to hear the man, the Vietnamese guy grabbed my brother's crotch, grabbed his dong, and he was shocked. He was ready to fight, expecting to be robbed or something, but the dong grab was very unexpected. After that, we started shouting and the men fled. For context, both me and my younger brother are competing MMA fighters. However, the whole situation was unexpected. We didn't engage in any violence towards the men, just shouted at them. It was a bit of a wild day. If you find yourselves in the parks of Vietnam at night, be wary, guys.